Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're jumping right into a super fast explainer on one of Python's most exciting web frameworks, FastAPI. Seriously, if you want to build high-performance APIs with as little code as possible, then you've come to the right place. Okay, let's get into it. So let's set the scene. You're a developer, right? You've got this great idea, and you need a backend. You need an API to power your web or mobile app. But you really don't want to get bogged down in a bunch of complicated boilerplate or frameworks that feel kind of slow. Sound familiar? Well, that's the exact problem we're going to solve today. So here's our game plan. First, we'll cover why FastAPI is such a big deal. Then, we'll actually build our first app, and I mean in seconds. After that, we'll dive into handling data, check out its superpowers like async support, see how to structure a real project, and then we'll wrap up with your own personal launchpad to get you building.
All right, let's start with the big picture. You know, Python has always been a fantastic choice for web development. I mean, the syntax is so readable and the ecosystem is just massive. But the web, it's evolved. It demands way more speed, more concurrency. And that, right there, is where FastAPI enters the chat.
This slide really says it all, doesn't it? Over on the left, you've got the traditional frameworks. They're powerful, for sure, but sometimes they can feel like they were built for a different era of the internet. And then on the right, you've got FastAPI. It was built from the ground up for the modern web. It is incredibly fast, like we're talking Node.js level performance. It's also built on modern Python features like type hints, which makes your code super robust, and it has asynchronous support baked right in from the start. That makes it crazy efficient. Okay, enough talk. Let's actually build something. This next part is where you're going to have that aha moment and see the real speed of FastAPI development. We are literally going from an empty folder to a live running API server in, well, under a minute. And yeah, it's really this simple. First, one single pip command installs the framework and this thing called Uvicorn, which is the server we need to run it. Next, you create just one Python file, main.py. And finally, you run the server from your terminal with this command. Oh, and that -reload flag? That is going to be your best friend during development because it automatically restarts the server every single time you save a change. It's awesome. And here's the actual code itself. Look how simple this is. First, you just import FastAPI. Then you create an instance of it. We've just called it app. Now the real magic happens on this line with the decorator, @app.get//. This is you telling FastAPI, hey, any GET request that comes to the main root URL of my site should be handled by this function right here. And that function, root, just returns a simple JSON message. That's it. That's the whole thing.
Okay, so your server is running. You can go to the URL in your browser and see your message. But that's not the real magic trick. This is where FastAPI just starts to show off.
And boom, this is the killer feature. Just by writing that handful of Python lines, FastAPI automatically generates this entire interactive API documentation page for you. All you do is add /docs to your URL. From this page, you can see all your endpoints, see what kind of data they expect, and you can even test them right from the browser. It is an enormous time saver. No more writing documentation by hand.
You know, an API is really all about moving data around, right? So a key question for any framework is, how easily can we get data from a client's request into our application code? Let's see how FastAPI makes this just incredibly intuitive. So let's start with the basics with data that comes directly from the URL itself. You can pass data right in the path, like an item's ID, or you can use query parameters. You know, those key value pairs that come after a question mark in URL. They're often used for stuff like searching or filtering. And just look at how clean this code is. To get a path parameter, you just put its name in curly braces in the path string, like /item/item ID. Then you just declare it as a function argument with a type hint, like item ID int. And for a query parameter, like in the second example, you don't even have to touch the path. You just add it as another function argument, like qstring. FastAPI sees those type hints and just automatically handles all the data conversion and validation for you. It's amazing. But what about more complex data? You know, like a big JSON object that comes in a POST request. For that, FastAPI uses another library called Pydantic. And honestly, the best way to think about it is as a bouncer for your API. It stands at the door and checks every single piece of incoming data to make sure it has the right shape and the right type before it's even allowed into your function. And the process couldn't be simpler. First, you define the structure of the data you're expecting using a totally standard Python class that just inherits from Pydantic's base model. Then, you use that class as a type hint in your endpoint function. And that is it, you're done. FastAPI and Pydantic handle everything else. automatically parsing the request body, validating it, and even documenting it. And if the data is bad, it automatically sends back a really detailed error message telling the client exactly what they did wrong.
Okay, so we've seen how fast it is to develop with FastAPI. But now let's talk about runtime performance and code quality. This is where we get to unlock some of its most powerful features.
So, FastAPI is built on an asynchronous foundation. All that means is by simply defining your function with async def, you can use the await keyword for any slow operations, like talking to a database or calling another API. This lets your server handle tons of other requests while it's waiting, which drastically improves performance when you're under heavy load. And don't worry, if you don't need it, regular old def functions still work perfectly fine. Next up is something called dependency injection. Now, it sounds really complicated, but it's actually a beautifully simple idea for keeping your code clean. You can write a function for some piece of logic you'll use over and over, like getting the current user or opening a database session. Then you just tell FastAPI to run that function for you and provide or inject the result into any endpoint that needs it. It keeps your endpoint logic super focused on its one specific job.
Okay, we know the features. We've seen the superpowers. But how do we put it all together into a real, production-ready application that can actually grow over time? Let's check out the blueprint for structuring a bigger project.
A clean structure is absolutely key. I mean, instead of putting everything into one giant main.py file, you really want to organize your code. This slide shows a fantastic starting point. Your main app object lives in main.py. You put all your Pydantic data models into models.py, your database connection logic in database.py, and then you split your actual endpoints into logical groups inside a routers directory. This makes your project so much easier to navigate and maintain as it gets bigger.
And when it's time to go live, you don't just use that simple development server. The standard practice for production is to use a process manager, something like Uvicorn, to run multiple Uvicorn workers. This lets your app handle a bunch of requests at the same time across multiple CPU cores. And that whole setup is usually placed behind a reverse proxy like NGIX for even better performance and security. We have covered a huge amount of ground in a really short time. So let's bring it all home with a final summary to really lock in these ideas and get you totally ready to launch your own projects.
So let's recap the absolute key takeaways here. FastAPI is your go-to for modern, high-performance, async-ready Python web apps. Remember that Pydantic is your data bouncer, giving you powerful automatic data validation for free. Use dependency injection to write cleaner, more reusable code, and please, never forget the massive amount of time you'll save with the automatic documentation. And finally, just know that it's ready to connect to pretty much any database you can throw at it, whether it's SQL or NoSQL. You now have the blueprint for building fast, modern, and really robust APIs with an incredible developer experience. All the tools are right here, ready to go. So the only question left is, what amazing thing are you going to build with it first?